Growing up in the shadow of a golden child isn't easy, but when your own mother tells you to stay quiet about your accomplishments while bragging about your sister's divorce, that's when you know family dynamics have reached a whole new level of dysfunction. What happens when years of being the family afterthought finally comes to a breaking point? This is the story of how one dinner changed everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I've always been the invisible middle child in the Harrison family. My older sister Melissa was the golden child, and my younger brother, Tyler, was the baby who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was just Lauren, the responsible one, the steady one, the one who never caused any trouble, and apparently the one whose achievements weren't worth mentioning. I moved away from our hometown of Cedar Springs, Michigan, almost a decade ago. It wasn't an angry departure or anything dramatic. I simply got accepted to a college in California and decided to build my life there after graduation. Distance provided clarity, and the further I got from Cedar Springs, the more I realized how skewed our family dynamic really was. Last month, I flew back home for my mom's 60th birthday celebration. I hadn't seen my family in nearly 2 years, partly due to the pandemic, partly due to my demanding job as a software engineer, and partly because, well, I wasn't exactly rushing back to a place where I felt invisible. My life in San Francisco had blossomed beautifully. I'd recently been promoted to lead developer at my company, bought my first condo, and even started seeing someone who made me feel valued in ways my family never had. His name was David, and for the first time in my life, I had someone who celebrated my successes instead of overlooking them. "You should tell your family about your promotion," David said as he drove me to the airport. "They'd be proud," I laughed. "You don't know my mom. She'd find a way to change the subject to Melissa's latest accomplishment before I could even finish my sentence." David squeezed my hand. "Then make them listen. You deserve to be heard." With his encouragement echoing, in my mind, I boarded the plane with a newfound determination. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time my family would actually see me. When I landed in Grand Rapids, my dad was waiting at the terminal. He'd aged since I'd last seen him. More gray in his hair, more lines around his eyes. But his hug was warm, and for a moment, I felt like maybe I'd been too hard on my family. "How's my girl?" he asked, taking my suitcase. "California treating you well?" "Better than well," I replied, feeling a flutter of excitement. "I got promoted to lead developer last month." "That's great, honey," he said, but I could tell his mind was elsewhere. "Your mom's been planning this dinner for weeks. Everyone's coming, even your Aunt Susan from Toledo." And just like that, my accomplishment was brushed aside. I should have been used to it by now, but David's words had given me hope. Make them listen. You deserve to be heard. The drive to Cedar Springs was filled with Dad's monologue about Melissa's recent divorce, how she was handling it so well, and how strong she was being. Apparently her husband Mark had cheated on her with his secretary, a biased cliché so perfect it almost seemed scripted. "Your mom's been a real rock for her," Dad said. "She's been staying at the house with the kids on weekends so Melissa can have some time to herself." I nodded, wondering if anyone had ever described me as strong or been a rock for me during my challenges. Probably not, since I'd learned early on that in the Harrison family, my problems weren't important enough to mention. When we pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, everything looked exactly the same. The white colonial with blue shutters, the carefully tended garden my mom prided herself on, the basketball hoop where Tyler had spent countless hours practicing. It was like stepping into a time capsule. Mom was at the door before we even got out of the car, waving enthusiastically. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless as always. At 60, Patricia Harrison still managed to look 45. "Lauren!" she exclaimed, embracing me in a cloud of Chanel No. 5. "You finally made it. We were beginning to think California had swallowed you whole. It's good to see you, Mom, I said, genuinely meaning it despite everything. Happy birthday. Thank you, dear. You look healthy. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe. Have you been getting enough sun? You're so pale. And there it was. The subtle criticism disguised as concern. Some things never changed. Inside, the house was bustling with activity. Aunt Susan was arranging flowers in the dining room. Uncle Bill was watching golf in the den, and my cousins were scattered throughout, catching up with each other. Tyler arrived shortly after me, his wife Amber and their 2-year-old son in tow. The prodigal sister returns, Tyler said, giving me a bear hug. How's life in Techland? Actually, really good, I started, feeling that flutter of excitement again. Lauren, Mom called from the kitchen. Can you help me with the appetizers? With a sigh, I followed her voice, my promotion once again left unmentioned. The kitchen was a hurricane of activity, with Mom directing operations like a general commanding troops. Slice these veggies for the crudité platter, she instructed, handing me a knife. Susan's bringing her famous spinach dip, and Melissa should be here soon with the kids. I took the knife and started chopping, falling easily into the role I'd always played, the helper, the quiet supporter in the background. So, Mom said, checking something in the oven, are you seeing anyone special in California? This was my chance. Actually, yes. His name is David. He's a graphic designer and things are getting pretty serious. We've been talking about moving in together. I took a breath. And I got promoted to lead developer at my company last month. Mom closed the oven door and turned to me. For a brief, shining moment, I thought she might actually acknowledge what I'd said. That's nice, dear, she replied, patting my arm. Oh, did your father tell you about Melissa? Such a terrible thing with Mark, but she's handling it with such grace. And the kids, they're adjusting remarkably well. Madison made honor roll this semester, even with all the upheaval at home. My heart sank. It was like I hadn't spoken at all. Mom, did you hear what I said? I got promoted to lead developer. It's a big deal, and David is... The front door opened, and a chorus of voices announced Melissa's arrival. Mom immediately abandoned our conversation, rushing to greet her eldest daughter and grandchildren. I stood in the kitchen, knife in hand, feeling that familiar invisibility cloak settle over me. David's words seemed far away now, drowned out by the reality of the Harrison family dynamic. Melissa entered the kitchen a few minutes later, her children, Madison, 12, and Mason, 9, trailing behind her. Despite going through a divorce, my sister looked radiant. Her blonde hair, eerily similar to Mom's, was shiny and perfectly styled, her outfit expensive and fashionable. Lauren, she exclaimed, air-kissing my cheek. Wow, you actually showed up this time. The passive-aggressive comment stung, but I forced a smile. Wouldn't miss Mom's birthday. Melissa immediately launched into the saga of her divorce, detailing Mark's betrayal and her heroic handling of the situation. Mom hovered nearby, nodding sympathetically and occasionally adding her own commentary about what a monster Mark had turned out to be. I continued preparing the vegetable platter, listening as my sister dominated the conversation. According to her, she was practically a saint for not slashing Mark's tires or burning his clothes. Mom agreed, praising Melissa's restraint and maturity. Speaking of news, I said during a rare pause, I got promoted at work. I'm leading a team of 15 developers now. Melissa gave me a distracted nod. That's cool. Anyway, so the judge granted me temporary full custody because Mark's apartment isn't suitable for children and just like that, I was invisible. Again. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of preparations and family members arriving. I found myself gravitating toward my cousins, who at least asked me questions about my life in California. When I mentioned my promotion to my cousin Emma, she actually congratulated me and asked for details. The conversation was so refreshing. that I almost wanted to cry. By 6 o'clock, everyone was gathered in the dining room. Mom had outdone herself with the spread: prime rib, roasted potatoes, asparagus with hollandaise, and her famous dinner rolls. The table was set with her best china and crystal glasses that sparkled under the chandelier light. I was seated between Uncle Bill and my cousin Jessica, directly across from Melissa, who had Mom and Dad on either side of her. The seating arrangement wasn't lost on me. The golden child front and center, the invisible one at the periphery. As we settled in, Mom stood up, wineglass in hand. "Before we start, I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate my birthday. Having my family around me is the greatest gift." Her eyes glistened with tears, especially during difficult times. "As most of you know, our Melissa has been going through a horrible ordeal with Mark, but she's shown such incredible strength." Melissa lowered her eyes modestly, playing the role of the brave divorcee to perfection. "A toast," Mom continued, "to family, to new beginnings, and to supporting each other through life's challenges." Everyone raised their glasses. I took a large sip of wine, wondering if this dinner would ever be about celebrating Mom's birthday rather than Melissa's divorce. As the food passed around, I turned to Uncle Bill and mentioned my promotion. Hunger for recognition making me persistent, despite the earlier dismissals. "Lead developer, huh?" he said, genuinely impressed. "That's a big responsibility. Your parents must be proud." I shrugged. "They don't really know the details. It's hard to explain tech stuff to them. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel." Now, back to where we left off. That wasn't true, of course. The problem wasn't their understanding. It was their interest, or lack thereof. Halfway through the main course, I decided to try once more. The conversation had momentarily shifted to politics, and I saw my opportunity during a lull. "I have some news," I announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I recently got promoted to lead developer at my company. It's a pretty big deal. I'm managing a team of 15 people now and overseeing some major projects." For a second, all eyes were on me. Dad nodded approvingly. Aunt Susan said, "Congratulations," and a few cousins smiled. But before anyone else could respond, Mom cleared her throat. "Lauren, sweetie, let's not make this dinner about work. We're here to celebrate family." She gave me a pointed look that clearly meant, "Be quiet." My cheeks burned with humiliation. I glanced around the table, expecting someone, Dad maybe, to come to my defense. But no one did. They all just returned to their meals. The moment passed. Then Mom turned to Melissa. "Tell everyone about the new house you're looking at, the one in the good school district." And just like that, Melissa launched into a detailed description of the 4-bedroom colonial she was planning to buy with her divorce settlement. Mom beamed with pride, asking questions and making suggestions, completely invested in every detail of Melissa's life. I sat there, fork suspended in midair, processing what had just happened. My mother had explicitly told me to be quiet about my career achievement, only to immediately encourage my sister to talk about her post-divorce housing plans. The contrast was so stark, so blatant, that I couldn't believe no one else noticed. But they didn't. Or if they did, they were too accustomed to our family dynamic to find it strange. I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment alone. In the hallway, I pulled out my phone and texted David. "Mom literally just told me to be quiet about my promotion because we're here to celebrate family," then turned around and asked Melissa to tell everyone about the house she's buying with her divorce money. "I can't make this stuff up." His response came quickly. "That's messed up. I'm sorry, babe. Remember what I said. You deserve to be heard. If they won't listen, that's their loss, not yours." His words strengthened me. I splashed cold water on my face, took a deep breath, and returned to the dining room with my head held high. When I got back to the table, Melissa was still talking about her house, now describing the backyard and how perfect it would be for the kids. It has a swimming pool, which is amazing because Madison's getting so good at swimming. She might even join the swim team next year. Mom nodded enthusiastically. She gets that from you. Remember how you were the county champion 3 years in a row? And the patio is perfect for entertaining, Melissa continued. I'm thinking of having everyone over for the 4th of July once we're settled. That sounds wonderful, Mom gushed. Bill, Susan, you'll have to come. Melissa throws the best parties. I took another sip of wine, watching this exchange with newfound clarity. It wasn't just that my mother favored Melissa. It was that she saw herself in Melissa. The blonde hair, the social graces, the emphasis on appearances. I, with my dark hair and preference for logic over social niceties, was too different. Too much like my dad's side of the family. As dessert was served, Mom's famous chocolate cake, my phone buzzed with another text from David. How's it going now? I replied, same old show, The Melissa Hour, featuring special guest star Mom. He sent back a heart emoji and, you're coming home tomorrow. Remember that. Home. San Francisco was home now. This house, these people, they were my past. David, my job, my condo, they were my future. And in that future, I was valued. I was seen. The realization washed over me like a wave, not of sadness, but of freedom. I didn't need my mother's approval anymore. I didn't need to compete with Melissa or fight for attention. I had built a life where I was celebrated for who I was, not ignored for who I wasn't. As the cake was being distributed, Mom stood up again, tears in her eyes. I just want to say how proud I am of all my children. She placed a hand on Melissa's shoulder. Especially this one, who's shown such courage these past few months. Divorce is never easy, but you've handled it with such grace. Thinking of the children first and never saying a bad word about Mark, despite how much he hurt you. Melissa dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. The performance was Oscar-worthy. And now you're starting fresh, buying a beautiful new home for my grandchildren. Mom's voice broke with emotion. You've always made the best of every situation. Ever, since you were a little girl. Something snapped inside me. Before I could stop myself, I was on my feet, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. What about me? The words burst out of me. I just told everyone I got promoted to lead developer, a position I worked my ass off for, and you told me to be quiet because we're here to celebrate family. Then you turn around and praise Melissa for buying a house with her divorce settlement? How is that about family and my promotion isn't? The table fell silent. All eyes were on me, expressions ranging from shock to embarrassment to, in my father's case, something that looked almost like pride. Mom's face flushed. Lauren, this is hardly the time for— It's never the time, is it? I continued, years of suppressed frustration pouring out. It's never the time to talk about my accomplishments or my life. But it's always the time to talk about Melissa, even when we're supposed to be celebrating your birthday. I looked around the table, addressing everyone now. Do you know that in the 10 years I've lived in California, Mom has visited me exactly once? But she's been to Boston to see Melissa at least twice a year. Do you know that when I called to tell her I bought my first condo, she changed the subject to Madison's dance recital within 30 seconds? Mom's mouth opened and closed, fish-like. For once in her life, Patricia Harrison was speechless. I'm not asking to be the favorite, I said, my voice steadier now. I'm just asking to be acknowledged, to be seen. Is that really too much to ask from my own mother? With that, I placed my napkin on the table and walked out of the dining room, through the front door, and onto the porch. The cool evening air hit my face, calming my racing heart. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of confused voices. I sat down, on the porch swing, the same one I'd spent countless teenage nights on, contemplating my place in the family. Now, at 32, I was still asking the same questions. The front door opened, and to my surprise, it wasn't Mom who came out, but Dad. Dad lowered himself onto the porch swing beside me. Neither of us spoke for a moment, just listening to the chorus of evening crickets and the muffled voices from inside. The porch light cast long shadows across the lawn, reminding me of summer nights spent catching fireflies while Dad watched from this very swing. "I'm sorry about that," I finally said, surprised to find my voice steady. "I didn't mean to ruin Mom's birthday dinner." Dad shook his head. "You didn't ruin anything, Lauren. If anything, you just served up a long overdue reality check." I glanced at him, startled by his response. In all my childhood memories, Dad had been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over when Mom played favorites. He'd never openly acknowledged the imbalance before. "You know," he continued, looking out at the darkening neighborhood, "I've watched this happening for years. I kept telling myself it would get better, that your mom would eventually see how she was treating you, and I told myself that by staying quiet, I was keeping the peace." He sighed heavily. "But I was really just being a coward. I should have spoken up long ago." A lump formed in my throat. "Why didn't you?" He turned to me with sad eyes. "Your mother and we come from different worlds. Her parents raised her to believe that appearances are everything. Success to them meant looking good to others. The right house, the right clothes, the right social connections. My family valued different things: education, self-reliance, integrity." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Melissa has always been your mother's mini-me. She embraced everything Patricia valued: popularity, social status, the picture-perfect life. You were more like me, practical, independent, driven by internal standards rather than external validation. I think your mother just never understood how to connect with that part of you." "That doesn't excuse ignoring my achievements," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "No, it doesn't," Dad agreed immediately. "Nothing excuses that. I'm not defending her behavior. I'm just trying to explain where it comes from. Understanding doesn't mean accepting." Inside, I could hear raised voices. Mom's distinctive tone carried through the walls, though I couldn't make out the words. "What do you think is happening there?" I asked. Dad chuckled softly. "If I had to guess, your Aunt Susan is reading your mother the riot act. She's always had a soft spot for you, and she doesn't put up with Patricia's nonsense the way the rest of us have." The thought of Aunt Susan defending me warmed something inside me. Susan was my mother's younger sister, but they couldn't have been more different. Where Mom was rigid and appearance-focused, Aunt Susan was warm and authentic. She'd been the one who'd taken an interest in my programming hobby as a teenager, even buying me books on coding when Mom dismissed it as just a phase. "I should probably apologize to everyone else," I said, though I didn't move from the swing. "They'll survive," Dad said dryly. "In fact, I think you just made Thanksgiving a lot more interesting. No one will be falling asleep during the football game this year." Despite everything, I laughed. It felt good, this moment of connection with my father. For years, I'd assumed he was oblivious to the dynamics in our family. Now I realized he'd been aware all along. He just hadn't known how to fix it. The front door opened again, and Tyler stepped out, looking uncomfortable in his role as family mediator. "Hey," he said, shoving his hands in his pockets. "So, that was intense." "Sorry," I offered, though I wasn't really. He shrugged. "Don't be. You said what needed saying." He glanced back toward the house. "Mom's pretty upset, though. She's in the kitchen claiming you've always been sensitive and dramatic." Of course she was. Classic Patricia Harrison. When confronted with her behavior, deflect and blame the victim. "Melissa's upset too," Tyler continued. "She says she didn't ask to be put on a pedestal, and it's not fair for you to take your issues with Mom out on her." This sparked a flare of irritation. "I didn't say anything about Melissa specifically. This isn't about her. It's about Mom's Behavior. I know that, Tyler said quickly. I'm just relaying the message. For what it's worth, I think you were right to speak up. I've noticed it too over the years. I just never said anything because... He trailed off, looking embarrassed. Because it wasn't happening to you, I finished for him. He nodded, having the grace to look ashamed. Yeah, it was easier to stay out of it. Dad stood up, his knees cracking slightly. I think it's time we all had an honest conversation. Decades overdue, but better late than never. Are you sure that's a good idea tonight? Tyler asked. It's Mom's birthday. All the more reason, Dad replied firmly. The best gift we could give your mother right now is honesty. This family has been tiptoeing around her favoritism for too long. It stops tonight. I looked up at my father with new respect. Where had this backbone been all these years? But I wasn't about to question it now. Together, the three of us walked back into the house. The dining room had emptied, with family members, retreating to the living room or kitchen in awkward clusters. Aunt Susan was indeed in the kitchen with Mom, their hushed but heated conversation stopping abruptly when we entered. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup slightly smudged, a rare imperfection for Patricia Harrison. When she saw me, her expression hardened. I hope you're satisfied, she said coldly. You've completely ruined my birthday dinner. Before I could respond, Dad stepped forward. That's enough, Patricia. Lauren didn't ruin anything. If anything was ruined, it was by years of you dismissing her achievements while showering attention on Melissa. Mom's eyes widened in shock. In 35 years of marriage, I doubted my father had ever spoken to her so directly. Richard, how can you say that? I love all my children equally. Just because Lauren chooses to see favoritism where there isn't any... Stop it, Dad interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. We both know that's not true. You've always favored Melissa, and to a lesser extent Tyler. Lauren has been treated like an afterthought in this family for too long, and I've been complicit by not speaking up. But that ends tonight. The kitchen fell silent. Aunt Susan placed a supportive hand on my shoulder, while Tyler shuffled uncomfortably by the door. Through the kitchen window, I could see the rest of the family in the backyard, clearly giving us space for this confrontation. Where's Melissa? I asked, noticing her absence. She took the kids upstairs, Tyler explained. She was pretty upset. I felt a twinge of guilt, not for speaking up, but for the collateral damage. Despite everything, Melissa was still my sister. Our complicated relationship wasn't entirely her fault. We should all sit down, Dad suggested, gesturing to the breakfast nook. Lauren, I think you should start by telling your mother exactly what you've been feeling. And Patricia, I want you to really listen. No interrupting, no dismissing, just listen. Mom looked like she wanted to object, but Aunt Susan gave her a pointed look. Sit down, Patty. For once in your life, listen to your daughter. Reluctantly, Mom sat at the table. I took the seat across from her, while Dad and Aunt Susan flanked us on either side. Tyler leaned against the counter, an observer rather than a participant. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. This was my chance, perhaps my only chance, to finally be heard. I needed to make it count. Mom, I love you, I began because, despite everything, it was true. But for as long as I can remember, I've felt invisible in this family. My achievements are brushed aside, my presence barely acknowledged. When I tell you important news about my life, you change the subject to Melissa or Tyler. You've visited me once in 10 years, but you see Melissa all the time. Tonight was just the breaking point, telling me to be quiet about my promotion, but encouraging Melissa to talk about her divorce. Mom started to speak, but Dad gently touched her arm, reminding her to listen. I don't need to be the favorite, I continued. I never expected that. But I do need to be acknowledged. I need to know that my life and my accomplishments matter. To you, that I matter to you. Because right now it feels like I don't. Mom's expression was unreadable, She sat rigidly, hands clasped on the table, her eyes fixed on a point just past my shoulder. I couldn't tell if my words were reaching her or bouncing off a wall of denial. "Is that all?" she asked when I finished, her voice carefully controlled. "Patricia," Dad warned. Mom held up a hand. "No, I want to know if Lauren has anything else to say before I respond." I thought for a moment. Just one more thing. I didn't come here looking for a confrontation. I came hoping that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time you'd actually see me. Something flickered across Mom's face. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. She took a deliberate breath, then met my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice softer than before. "I never intended to make you feel invisible, Lauren. I certainly never intended to play favorites among my children." "Intentions aren't the issue," Aunt Susan interjected gently. "It's the impact of your actions that matters." Mom shot her sister an irritated look before turning back to me. "You've always been so self-sufficient. Even as a child, you rarely asked for help or attention. You just went about your business, solving your own problems, doing your own thing. Melissa needed more guidance, more support. Tyler was younger, so naturally he required more attention. You seemed fine on your own." "So because I didn't constantly demand your attention, I didn't deserve any?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "That's not what I meant," Mom said quickly. I never knew how to connect with you, Lauren. You were always so different from me. From a young age, you had your nose in a book or were tinkering with computers. Those weren't things I understood. Melissa's interests, dance, social activities, later her marriage and children, those were familiar territory. For me, I knew how to be supportive there. It was the most honest explanation my mother had ever given me, and despite my lingering hurt, I appreciated it. "Mom, I'm a software engineer, not an alien," I said, trying to inject some lightness into the conversation. "You didn't need to understand coding to ask me about my day or celebrate when I achieved something." Mom looked down at her hands. "You're right. I should have made more effort. I suppose I fell into patterns without realizing how they might affect you. The question now," Dad said, "is what happens going forward. Because I don't want Lauren to feel like she has to choose between her happiness in California and her place in this family." Mom nodded slowly. "I don't want that either." A tentative knock on the kitchen door interrupted us. Melissa stood there, her eyes red from crying. "Can I join this conversation? I think I should be part of it." I nodded, and she slipped into the seat beside Mom. "I heard some of what you said, Lauren," she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "And I want you to know I never intentionally tried to overshadow you or take Mom's attention. I didn't even realize it was happening that way." "I know," I said, and I meant it. Melissa might be self-absorbed at times, but she wasn't malicious. "This isn't about you, Mel. It's about the dynamic in our family, which none of us created alone." She nodded, relief visible on her face. "For what it's worth, I've always been proud of you. I brag about my tech genius sister all the time at work. I guess I never thought to do it when you were actually around." "Speaking of which," Aunt Susan said, turning to me with genuine interest, "tell us about this promotion. Lead developer sounds impressive." And just like that, the ice was broken. For the next 20 minutes, I talked about my job, my team, the projects I was overseeing. Everyone asked questions, expressed amazement at the technical challenges, and seemed genuinely impressed. Even Mom, after some initial stiffness, began to engage, asking about my company's culture and whether I enjoyed managing others. It was surreal, the attention and interest I'd craved for so long, finally happening. In my mother's kitchen after an emotional confrontation. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't how I'd imagined it happening, but it was real. When the conversation naturally lulled, Mom cleared her throat. I think we should rejoin the rest of the family. They're probably wondering what's going on. Before we do, I said, I need to know that this isn't just a one-time thing, Mom. I need to know that something is actually going to change. Mom hesitated, then reached across the table and took my hand, a rare physical gesture from her. I can't promise I'll get it right immediately, Lauren. Old habits are hard to break. But I can promise to try. And I want you to call me out when I slip back into old patterns, because I probably will at times, without even realizing it. It wasn't the perfect apology or guarantee I might have hoped for, but it was honest. And honesty was something our family needed more of. Deal, I said, squeezing her hand before letting go. We returned to the dining room to find the rest of the family had migrated back inside. The cake had been served in our absence, plates half-eaten around the table. A chorus of awkward smiles greeted us as we entered. Everything okay? Uncle Bill asked cautiously. Getting there, Dad replied diplomatically. Mom surprised me by linking her arm through mine as we approached the table. We're missing out on my birthday cake, she said, with forced cheerfulness. And I think we should restart the celebration. Lauren, why don't you tell everyone about your promotion while we finish dessert? It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it meant everything. I looked at my mother's face and saw something I'd rarely seen there when she looked at me. Genuine effort. She was trying, really trying, to change a dynamic that had defined our relationship for decades. As I took my seat and began to share my news with the extended family, I caught David's text on my phone. How's it going? Any better? I quickly typed back. Actually, yes. We'll call you later with details. Things might finally be changing around here. His response was immediate. Proud of you for speaking up. That took courage. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the crowded dining room. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I might actually belong in two places, the life I'd built for myself in California and the family I'd been born into in Michigan. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Decades of established family. Dynamics don't change overnight. Mom would backslide, old patterns would reassert themselves, and there would be moments when I'd question whether anything had really changed. But something fundamental had shifted tonight. We'd acknowledged the elephant in the room that had been stomping around our family gatherings for years. As I looked around the table at my relatives' faces, some confused, some relieved, some still processing what had happened, I realized that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't keeping the peace or maintaining the status quo. Sometimes it's disrupting that peace to make room for something more authentic to grow in its place. Dad caught my eye across the table and gave me a subtle nod of approval. Beside me, Aunt Susan patted my hand. And for the first time in years, when I looked at my mother, I didn't see dismissal or distraction in her eyes. I saw recognition. I was finally seen. So, Uncle Bill said, after I'd finished explaining my promotion, when are you bringing this David fellow home to meet everyone? He sounds like a keeper. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Maybe Thanksgiving, if he's brave enough. After tonight, Tyler quipped. He'd better be. The family chuckled, the tension officially broken. As conversations resumed around the table, now flowing more naturally, I caught Mom watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. When our eyes met, she didn't look away as she might have in the past. Instead, she offered a small, hesitant smile. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings are enough. 6 months have passed since Mom's birthday dinner. The flight back to San Francisco, the day after our confrontation, had been surprisingly peaceful. Mom drove me to the airport herself, something she'd never done before, and we talked more in that 45-minute drive than we had in years. Not about anything deep or emotional, just simple conversation about my neighborhood in San Francisco, the cafes I frequented, the hiking trails I'd discovered in Northern California. As we pulled up to the departures terminal, Mom hesitated, then asked, "Would it be all right if I came to visit you sometime? I'd like to see where you live." The request had caught me off guard, but I nodded. I'd like that. Now, half a year later, I stood in my condo, frantically tidying up before my parents' arrival. Yes, both of them were coming, a family first. They'd never traveled together to see me before. "Relax," David said, grabbing my hands as I rearranged the throw pillows on the couch for the third time. "The place looks great. You look great. Everything is going to be fine." I gave him a grateful smile. In the month since Mom's birthday dinner, David had been my rock, listening to every small update in my evolving relationship with my family. He'd talked me through the moments of doubt, celebrated the small victories, and reminded me that change happens slowly, especially when it involves decades of established patterns. "I just want everything to be perfect," I admitted. "Perfect is the enemy of good," he reminded me, a phrase I often said to my development team when they got too caught up in details. "Your parents are coming to see you, not judge your decorating skills." There was wisdom in his words, but old. Habits die hard. I'd spent most of my life feeling like I needed to work twice as hard to receive half the recognition my siblings got. That mentality wasn't going to disappear overnight. The doorbell rang, sending a jolt of nervous energy through, and this was it. My parents in my space, seeing the life I'd built. David squeezed my hand reassuringly, then followed me to the door. When I opened it, Mom and Dad stood there, looking slightly jet-lagged but smiling. Dad held a bouquet of flowers, and Mom clutched a gift bag. "Welcome to San Francisco," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "Lauren, honey, it's so beautiful," Mom exclaimed, looking around my living room with its panoramic view of the city. "Richard, look at that view," Dad whistled appreciatively as he handed me the flowers. "Not bad for a lead developer," he said with a wink. I introduced them to David, who they were meeting in person for the first time. Mom surprised me by giving him a warm hug instead of her usual formal handshake with my past boyfriends. Dad and David immediately bonded over a discussion about the local craft beer scene. "Let me show you around," I offered, leading them through my condo. It wasn't massive, San Francisco real estate being what it was, but it was mine, every carefully chosen piece of furniture and artwork a reflection of my taste and journey. "You've done so well for yourself," Mom said softly as we stood in my home office with its dual monitors and ergonomic chair. I don't think I realized just how well until seeing it. Something in her tone made me turn to look at her more closely. "Mom, are you okay?" She nodded, blinking rapidly. "I'm just proud of you, Lauren, and a little ashamed that it took me so long to see what was right in front of me all these years." The admission hung in the air between us, fragile and precious. I didn't know how to respond without potentially shattering the moment. "You're here now," I finally said. "That's what matters." She reached out and squeezed my hand, a gesture that was becoming more frequent in our interactions. "Yes, I'm here now." Over dinner at my favorite local restaurant, our conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years. Mom asked detailed questions about my work, showing genuine interest in understanding what I did day to day. Dad shared stories about his own career, drawing parallels between his experiences and mine. "Did you know your father was offered a position at IBM in their early days?" Mom said, surprising me with a piece of family history I'd never heard before. "He turned it down to stay in Michigan because my mother was ill at the time and I couldn't leave her." I looked at Dad, astonished. "You never told me that." He shrugged modestly. "It was long ago. Different time, different choices. But you could have been part of the tech revolution?" He chuckled. "Maybe. Or maybe I'd have been laid off in the 90s restructuring. Who knows? I don't regret it. I had a good career, a family I love. That's what matters." The pride in his voice when he looked at me made something warm bloom in my chest. All those years, I'd thought my interest in technology had come out of nowhere. Now I realized there might have been a dormant gene, a path not taken by my father, that I was now exploring. Besides, Dad added, I get to live vicariously through you now, my daughter, the tech executive. I'm hardly an executive, I protested, though the title did have a nice ring to it. Yet, David interjected with a smile, she's on track for a CTO position within 5 years, if you ask me. Mom raised her wine glass. To Lauren's future as CTO, then. We clinked glasses, and I marveled at the surreal nature of the moment, my mother toasting to my career ambitions. 6 months ago, this would have been unimaginable. After dinner, as we walked along the Embarcadero, enjoying the lights reflecting off the bay, Mom linked her arm through mine. I've been seeing a therapist, she said without preamble. About a week after your visit. I nearly stumbled in surprise. Patricia Harrison seeing a therapist? The woman who considered any form of mental health support a sign of weakness? Wow, Mom. That's great. How is it going? It's difficult, she admitted. Painful, sometimes. Maggie, Dr. Levinson, doesn't let me get away with much. She's helped me see patterns I've been blind to for decades. She paused, watching a ferry cross the bay. Did you know my mother favored my sister Susan over me? I shook my head, though in retrospect, it made perfect sense. The cycle repeating itself through generations. Susan was artistic, free-spirited. I was a rigid perfectionist. Mom connected with Susan's creativity in a way she never did with me. Mom sighed. I spent my entire childhood trying to earn my mother's approval by being perfect. Perfect grades, perfect appearance, perfect behavior. It never worked. And then I did the same thing to you that she did to me, just in reverse. I favored the child who was like me, not the one who was different. The insight was so profound, so fundamental to our relationship, that it left me speechless. All these years, I'd assumed Mom favored Melissa because she was objectively more worthy of attention. I'd never considered that it might be about Mom's own unresolved pain. I'm not telling you this to excuse my behavior, Mom continued. Nothing excuses how I made you feel invisible. I'm telling you because I want you to know I'm working to understand it so I don't keep repeating the pattern. I squeezed her arm. Thank you for telling me. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, the cool San Francisco evening wrapping around us like a blanket. How's Melissa doing? I asked eventually. We'd spoken a few times since the birthday dinner confrontation, awkward conversations where neither of us quite knew how to navigate our new awareness of the family dynamic. She settled into the new house, Mom said. The divorce was finalized last month. She's dating again, actually. A history teacher from Madison School. The old mom would have spent the next 20 minutes detailing Melissa's new relationship. This mom simply stated the facts and moved on. And she's thinking about going back to school for her master's in education. She's always loved working with children, and with both kids in school full-time now, she has the opportunity. That's great, I said, genuinely happy for my sister. She'd be an amazing teacher. She would, Mom agreed. Then, with a sidelong glance at me, she asked about you the other day. Wanted to know if you'd be coming home for Thanksgiving. The unspoken question hung in the air. Would I return to Cedar Springs for the holidays, now that things were changing? I'm thinking about it, I said honestly. David and I have been talking about it. His family is in Seattle, so we might split the holidays. Thanksgiving with you, Christmas with them. Mom's face lit up with genuine pleasure. We'd love that. And of course, David is more than welcome. Ahead of us, Dad and David had stopped to look at a street performer, giving Mom and me this moment of privacy. I decided to seize it. Can I ask you something, Mom? Something direct? She nodded, though I sensed a slight trepidation. Are these changes, the therapy, the visit, the interest in my life, are they real? Or is this just guilt driving you to make an effort that will fade with time? It was a brutal question, but one I needed answered. I couldn't invest emotionally in this new relationship if it was just a temporary reaction to being called out. Mom didn't flinch from the directness. It's a fair question, she acknowledged. The initial push was guilt, I won't deny that. That night at the dinner table, seeing the hurt in your eyes, realizing I had caused that, it broke something open in me. But what's happened since then goes beyond guilt. She turned to face me fully, her expression more open and vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. I've lost so many years with you, Lauren. Years I can never get back. I don't want to lose any more. So yes, this is real. I'm not perfect, and I'll still make mistakes. But I'm committed to being the mother you deserve, even if I'm learning how to do that very late in the game. Her words resonated with sincerity. Mom had many flaws, but dishonesty had never been one of them. If she said she was committed to change, she meant it. That's all I needed to hear, I said softly. We rejoined Dad and David, the four of us continuing our walk along the waterfront. As we approached the ferry building, David nudged me gently. Should we tell them now? He whispered. I nodded, a flutter of excitement in my stomach. We'd been waiting for the right moment, and this felt like it. Mom, Dad, I said, stopping them near a bench overlooking the water. We have some news to share. They looked at us expectantly, Dad's expression curious. Mom's slightly anxious. David slipped his arm around my waist. We're engaged. Mom's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes widening. Dad's face split into a broad grin. It just happened last weekend, I explained, holding out my left hand where a simple but elegant diamond ring sparkled. We were hiking in Muir Woods, and David proposed at the lookout point. Oh, Lauren, Mom exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. I'm so happy for you both. So happy. When she pulled back, there were tears in her eyes. Genuine tears of joy. Dad clapped David on the shoulder before hugging me as well. Congratulations, honey. He's a good man. I knew it the moment I met him. We were thinking about a small ceremony, David said. Nothing too elaborate. Maybe next spring, when the weather is nice. Whatever you want, Mom said, surprising me again. The old Patricia Harrison would have immediately started planning an elaborate wedding designed to impress her social circle. This new version seemed content to follow our lead. We'd like to have it here in California, I added, watching Mom carefully. But we'd love your help with planning, Mom, if you'd want to be involved. The invitation was an olive branch, a way of including her while maintaining boundaries. Her face lit up with pleasure. I'd be honored, she said simply. Later that night, after my parents had checked into their hotel and promised to meet us for brunch the next morning, David and I lay in bed, reflecting on the day. That went better than I expected, I admitted. Much better. Your mom is really trying, David observed. I can see why you were skeptical, but there's a genuine effort there. I nodded against his chest. It's still strange, having her actually interested in my life, but a good strange. You deserve it, he said, kissing the top of my head. You always have. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought about the journey of the past 6 months. The confrontation at Mom's birthday dinner had been painful but necessary, like lancing a wound to allow healing to begin. There was still so much work to do, so many conversations to have, so many patterns to unlearn, but for the first time, it felt possible. My phone buzzed with a text. Sleepily, I reached for it, expecting it to be my parents confirming brunch plans. Instead, it was from Melissa. Mom told me your news. Congratulations, sis. I'm so happy for you and David. Can't wait to meet him at Thanksgiving. P.S. dibs on maid of honor? I smiled in the darkness. Another small step forward. Change doesn't happen overnight. Decades of family dynamics don't transform in a single confrontation or conversation, but they can begin to shift, one honest exchange at a time. Being told to stay quiet at that dinner table 6 months ago had turned out to be the catalyst I needed to finally raise my voice, not just in that moment, but in reshaping my place within my family. As I set my phone down and curled back into David's embrace, I realized something profound. Sometimes the most important thing isn't being seen by others, but having the courage to see yourself clearly enough to demand the recognition you deserve. It had taken 32 years, but I'd finally found that courage. And in doing so, I'd not only changed how my family saw me, I'd changed how I saw myself. No longer the invisible middle child, no longer the afterthought, just Lauren. Seen, heard, and valued at last. Thanksgiving in Cedar Springs. The words alone would have filled me with dread a year ago. But as David and I drove our rental car through the familiar streets of my hometown, I felt something unexpected. Anticipation. "You seem cheerful," David observed, reaching across the console to squeeze my hand. "Last Thanksgiving, you insisted on volunteering at a homeless shelter rather than fly home." I smiled, watching the familiar storefronts of Main Street roll. "Far so. Last Thanksgiving, I was still the invisible middle child. This year feels different." In the 6 months since my parents' visit to San Francisco, our family's transformation had continued, sometimes in fits and starts, but always moving forward. Weekly phone calls with Mom had evolved from awkward formality to genuine connection. She'd even created an Instagram account to follow my posts about San Francisco life and hiking adventures with David, a small gesture that meant the world to me. Dad had become more vocal in group family chats, no longer allowing himself to be a passive bystander in our dynamics, and Melissa had reached out independently several times, our conversations gradually shifting from superficial pleasantries to something approaching real sisterhood. "I'm proud of you," David said as we turned onto Maple Avenue. "It takes courage to rebuild these relationships instead of just walking away." "I couldn't have done it without you," I replied honestly. His unwavering support had been my anchor through every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt. As we pulled into my parents' driveway, I noticed several cars already parked along the street. The whole family had assembled, Melissa and her kids, Tyler and his family, plus aunts, uncles, and cousins. My stomach tightened slightly with nervousness. "Remember," David said, reading my expression, "you're not the same person you were last year, and neither are they. This is a new chapter." He was right. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car just as the front door opened. Mom appeared on the porch, wearing an apron and a genuine smile. "You made it," she called, hurrying down the steps to greet us. "How was the drive from the airport?" "Not bad," I replied, accepting her hug. "Traffic was light." "David, welcome back," Mom said, embracing him with the same warmth. "We're so glad you could join us for Thanksgiving." "Wouldn't miss it," he said, and I could tell he meant it. Inside, the house was filled with delicious aromas and the buzz of conversation. Dad was in the living room watching football with Tyler and Uncle Bill, while Aunt Susan directed kitchen operations with her usual efficiency. Melissa's children, Madison and Mason, were playing a board game with their cousins in the den. "Lauren's here," Mom announced as we entered, and heads turned in our direction. "There's the bride-to-be," Aunt Susan exclaimed, wiping her hands on a towel before coming to embrace me. "Let me see that ring again. Richard, your daughter's here." Dad looked up from the TV and immediately rose, crossing the room to give me a bear hug. "There she is. How's my tech genius?" The genuine welcome was overwhelming. A year ago, my arrival would have been acknowledged with distracted nods before conversation returned to Melissa or Tyler. Now, I was the center of attention. "Aunt Lauren!" Madison came running from the den, having shot up at least 2 inches since I'd last seen her. At 12, She was on the cusp of adolescence, all gangly limbs and braces. "Mom said you might help me with my science project. It's about coding." "I'd love to," I told her, genuinely touched that my niece was interested in my field. "When did you get into coding?" She shrugged. "After Mom told me what you do. It sounded cool, so I joined the coding club at school." I glanced across the room at Melissa, who stood in the kitchen doorway with a slight smile. "Your mom told you about my job?" "All the time," Madison confirmed. "She says you're like super important at your company." The revelation that Melissa had been talking about me to her children, positively no less, caught me off guard. Our reconciliation had been tentative, focused mainly on our direct relationship rather than how we spoke about each other to others. Melissa approached, looking slightly nervous. "I hope that's okay. The kids were curious about their aunt in California." "It's more than okay," I assured her. "I'm just surprised." "Pleasantly, I hope," she said with a small laugh. "Definitely." An awkward silence fell between us, years of complicated history hovering unspoken. Then Melissa did something unexpected. She pulled me into a hug. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. "Both of you," she added, smiling at David as she pulled away. "Me too," I replied, and meant it. Dinner was a far cry from the tense affair of Mom's birthday. The conversation flowed naturally, with everyone getting a chance to speak and be heard. Mom had placed David and me near the center of the table, a symbolic positioning that wasn't lost on me. When the topic turned to our wedding plans, I waited for Mom to take over, to insist on a larger ceremony or traditional venue. Instead, she listened attentively as David and I described our vision for a small ceremony in a redwood grove near San Francisco. "It sounds perfect for you two," she said when we finished. "Very intimate and meaningful." "You're not disappointed we're not having it at St. Mark's?" I asked, referring to the church where both Melissa and Tyler had been married in elaborate ceremonies. Mom shook her head. "This is your wedding, Lauren. It should reflect who you are, not who I think you should be." She glanced at my father. "I've been learning that lesson in many areas of life lately." After dinner, while the others gathered in the living room for games, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Tyler as we loaded the dishwasher. "So," he said, handing me a plate. "This is different, huh?" "Very," I agreed. "You know, after that night at Mom's birthday, I did a lot of thinking about my role in all this." He focused intently on arranging silverware in the basket. "I realized I've been complicit in how you were treated. I saw what was happening, but I never spoke up." "You were the baby of the family," I said. "It wasn't your responsibility to fix the dynamic." "Maybe not," he acknowledged. "But I could have been a better brother." "I'm sorry, Lauren." The apology was unexpected but healing. "Thanks, Tyler. That means a lot." "And I'm sorry I never really got to know David until now. He's great, way better than any of Melissa's exes." He grinned mischievously. I laughed. "Don't let her hear you say that." "Too late," came Melissa's voice from the doorway. She entered carrying a stack of dessert plates. And he's right. Mark was a grade-A jerk, as recent events have proven. "How are things going with the history teacher?" I asked, genuinely curious. "About my sister's new relationship." Melissa's face softened. "Good, actually. Really good. Pete's nothing like Mark. He's kind, attentive, great with the kids. Not as financially successful, but I'm learning there are more important things." She glanced between Tyler and me. "I would have brought him today, but it felt too soon to introduce him to the whole family circus." "Next time," I suggested. "Definitely." She hesitated. "Actually, I was hoping you and David might meet him first. Maybe when you're back for Christmas. Your opinion matters to me." The admission touched me deeply. Melissa had never sought my opinion on anything important before. "We'd love to," I said. Later that evening, After pie had been served and the cousins had departed, I found Mom alone in the sunroom, gazing out at the darkened garden. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. She patted the seat beside her. "I was hoping you would." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the wind stir the bare branches of the oak tree Dad had planted when I was born. My tree, as they'd called it. "I've been meaning to give you something," Mom said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a small velvet box. This was my grandmother's. I opened the box to find a delicate gold locket on a thin chain. When I pressed the tiny clasp, it opened, to reveal a miniature photograph of a young woman. "That's her," Mom explained. "Elizabeth Walker Harrison, your great-grandmother." I studied photography. The woman had dark hair and serious eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Something about her expression seemed familiar. "She looks like me," I said, surprised. Mom nodded. I was looking through old family albums after our talk in San Francisco, trying to understand the patterns in our family. I found this photograph and was struck by the resemblance. She touched the locket gently. Elizabeth was brilliant. A mathematics teacher at a time when women rarely pursued such fields. My mother always said I took after my father's side, not hers. The parallel to our own relationship hung unspoken between us. "Why are you giving me this now?" I asked. "Because it belongs with you," Mom said simply. "I should have seen the connection sooner, should have celebrated that you carry on her legacy in your own way. Instead, I tried to mold you into something more familiar to me." She took my hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, Lauren. To really see you." "You see me now," I said softly. "That's what matters." She helped me fasten the locket around my neck, its weight light but significant against my collarbone. A piece of family history, a connection to a woman I'd never known, but whose blood and perhaps whose spirit ran through me. "It looks perfect on you," Mom said, satisfied in her voice. When David and I left for the airport 3 days later, the goodbyes were emotional in a way they'd never been before. Mom hugged me tightly, making me promise to call when we landed. Dad slipped an envelope into my hand. "A little something toward the wedding," he whispered. Melissa extracted a promise that I'd help Madison with her coding project via Zoom. Even Tyler seemed reluctant to see us go. "That was," David began as we drove away from the house. "Surreal," I finished for him. "But in the best possible way. Your family has changed." I nodded, touching the locket at my throat. "We all have." The changes weren't perfect or complete. There had been moments during our visit when old patterns threatened to resurface, a dismissive comment from Mom that she'd quickly corrected, a flash of Melissa's former self-absorption quickly tempered by awareness. But the difference was that now, these moments were recognized for what they were and actively addressed rather than allowed to fester. Back in San Francisco, our apartment felt especially welcoming after the emotional intensity of the family visit. As David unpacked, I opened the envelope Dad had given me. Inside was a check for a substantial amount, far more than I'd expected, and a handwritten note. "Lauren, this is long overdue. When you were born, your mother and I started college funds for each of our children. When you received your scholarship to Stanford, we didn't need to use yours. We invested it instead, intending to give it to you when the time was right. That time should have been when you bought your condo or when you got your promotion. I'm sorry we held on to it for so long. Consider it our contribution to your wedding and to the bright future you and David are building together. I couldn't be prouder of the woman you've become and of the courage you've shown in helping our family heal. Love, Dad. P.S. I found my old IBM offer letter in the attic. The starting salary seems laughable now, but in 1985 it felt like a fortune. I've included a copy, thought you might get a kick out of it." I showed the note to David, who read it with a warm smile. "Your dad's a good man." "He always was," I said. He just needed to find his voice, too. That night, as we settled back into our routine, I pulled out my laptop to check work emails. A message from my boss caught my attention. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. When you're back, let's talk about the CTO position opening up next quarter. Jackson's retiring, and your name is at the top of the short list of internal candidates. Nothing official yet, but wanted to give you a heads up. I stared at the screen, momentarily stunned. Chief Technology Officer? It was beyond what I'd dreamed possible at this stage in my career. My first instinct was to call my parents, and that realization alone made me smile. A year ago, I'd have shared such news with David and my friends, but not my family. Now, they were among the first people I wanted to tell. I picked up my phone and dialed the familiar number, anticipation bubbling within me. As it rang, I fingered the locket around my neck, thinking of Elizabeth Walker Harrison and her pioneering spirit, of Mom's journey toward healing and self-awareness, of my own path from invisibility to recognition. 3 rings, then Mom's voice. "Lauren? Is everything okay? Did you make it home safe?" "Everything's great, Mom," I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. "Actually, I have some news to share." And this time, I knew with certainty that she would listen. The journey of healing family wounds is rarely linear or complete. There are setbacks, moments when old patterns reassert themselves, times when progress feels fragile. But that Thanksgiving marked a turning point for the Harrison family, a step toward a future where being seen and heard wasn't something to fight for, but something freely given. The night I was told to stay quiet at dinner had been painful, but necessary. It had cracked open the facade of family harmony to reveal the dysfunction beneath, allowing real healing to begin. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that disrupt the peace, that force uncomfortable truths into the light, where they can finally be addressed. As I shared my potential promotion news with my mother, hearing her genuine excitement and pride, I realized that finding my voice had given her permission to find hers as well. In speaking my truth, I had freed not just myself, but my entire family from patterns that had bound us for generations, and that perhaps was the greatest achievement of all. Spring arrived in San Francisco with characteristic fog and fleeting sunshine. In the redwood grove of Muir Woods, where David had proposed nearly a year earlier, white folding chairs formed a semicircle before an arch woven with local wildflowers and eucalyptus branches. Our wedding day had arrived, and with it, the culmination of the most transformative year of my life. Not just because I was marrying the man who had encouraged me to find my voice, but because that voice had reshaped my entire world, professionally, personally, and especially within my family. 10 minutes, my friend Jenna, the maid of honor, announced as she poked her head into the small cabin where I was getting ready. "Is everyone here?" I asked, adjusting the simple ivory slip dress I'd chosen over traditional bridal gowns. "Full house," she confirmed with a grin. "Your mom's been personally greeting every guest. She's like a one-woman welcome committee." I smiled at the image. Mom had arrived in California a week early to help with last-minute preparations, insisting on staying in a hotel rather than with us to give you space. The old Patricia Harrison would have commandeered my kitchen and rearranged my furniture. This new version respected boundaries while still offering genuine support. And David? I asked, "Cool as a cucumber. Your dad's with him. They're having some kind of heart-to-heart moment." Jenna tilted her head. "Your family's different than I expected, based on your stories." "They're different than they used to be," I replied, thinking of the journey we'd traveled since that fateful dinner. "We all are." A soft knock at the door interrupted us. "Lauren? It's me." Melissa's voice. I hadn't expected to see her until the ceremony. "Come in," I called. My sister entered, looking elegant in the sage green dress we'd selected for her role as bridesmaid. Her blonde hair was swept into an updo similar to mine, and for once, the resemblance between us was striking despite our different colorings. "Wow, she said, her eyes widening. You look incredible. Thanks, I replied, suddenly self-conscious. Is everything okay out there? Perfect. She hesitated. I just wanted a moment alone with you before everything starts. Jenna tactfully excused herself, leaving us in rare privacy. Melissa fiddled with her bracelet, uncharacteristically nervous. I brought you something, for the something borrowed tradition. From her clutch, she withdrew a delicate silver hairpin, adorned with tiny pearls. Mom gave this to me on my wedding day. I know that marriage didn't work out, but this pin has been in the family for generations. I thought, maybe you'd want to wear it today. The gesture was unexpectedly touching. A year ago, Melissa would never have offered to share something so personal, especially not something that highlighted her previous wedding. It's beautiful, I said, genuinely moved. Are you sure? Positive. She stepped forward, carefully sliding the pin into my updo. There. Perfect. Our eyes met in the mirror, and something unspoken passed between us, an acknowledgement of how far we'd come, of the new relationship we were building brick by careful brick. I'm really happy for you, Lauren, she said softly. David he sees you, really sees you. That's rare. Pete seems to see you too, I observed. We'd met Melissa's new boyfriend at Christmas, and I'd been impressed by his quiet attentiveness, so different from Mark's flashy charm. She nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. He does. It's new territory for me, being with someone who values substance over appearance. She laughed lightly. Mom's still adjusting to the idea that he drives a 10-year-old Subaru instead of a BMW. But she's trying, I pointed out. She is, Melissa agreed. We all are. Another knock at the door heralded Dad's arrival. He stopped, short when he saw us together, emotion flickering across his face. My girls, he said simply, his voice rough with feeling. Together on Lauren's wedding day. I've waited a long time for this. The simple statement acknowledged years of distance between Melissa and me, and the healing that had allowed us to stand together in this moment. It's time, he said, offering me his arm. Ready to get married? I took one last look in the mirror, at the woman I'd become, at my sister beside me, at my father's proud smile. The journey from invisible middle child to confident bride had been a winding one, but every step had brought me here, to this moment of clarity and connection. Ready, I confirmed. The ceremony was everything David and I had envisioned, intimate, meaningful, surrounded by ancient redwoods that put human concerns into perspective. 60 guests, only those closest to us, witnessed our vows beneath the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. Mom sat in the front row, elegant in a blue dress she'd chosen with my input, rather than imposing her preferences. Beside her, Tyler and Amber wrangled their now 3-year-old son, while Madison and Mason, dressed in their finest, beamed from the second row. Aunt Susan dabbed tears with a handkerchief, and Uncle Bill, never comfortable with emotional displays, stared fixedly at a point above our heads, his jaw working suspiciously. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheers. David kissed me with a promise of forever, and as we turned to face our loved ones as a married couple, I caught my mother's eye. She nodded once, a gesture of approval, respect, and love that meant more than any verbose praise could have. The reception was held at a nearby vineyard, with long tables set beneath string lights and the stars. Wine flowed, farm-to-table food was served family style, and speeches brought laughter and tears in equal measure. When it was my father's turn to speak, he rose with a glass in hand, surveying the gathering with misty eyes. For those who don't know me, I'm Richard Harrison, Lauren's father. I've been blessed with 3 remarkable children, each unique, each precious in their own way. He glanced at Melissa and Tyler, then focused on me. but today is about Lauren and David and the extraordinary journey that brought them together. He spoke of my childhood determination, my academic achievements, and my professional success, details I'd never realized he'd noticed or remembered. He described David as the partner he'd always hoped I'd find, someone who recognized my value and amplified my strengths. "But I want to share something personal," he continued, his voice growing more serious. "About a year ago, our family had a reckoning of sorts. The kind of difficult conversation that feels like it might break you in the moment, but ultimately makes you stronger." My heart stuttered. I hadn't expected him to reference that night so publicly. Lauren had the courage to speak her truth, to demand the recognition she'd always deserved but rarely received. It would have been easier to stay silent, to maintain the status quo. But she chose the harder path, the path of honesty. He looked directly at me. That courage forced our family to confront painful truths and begin healing wounds we'd ignored for too long. Beside me, David squeezed my hand supportively. "So today, as we celebrate this marriage, I'm also celebrating the daughter who taught her old dad that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is disrupt the peace. The daughter who showed us all that being seen and heard isn't just a wish. It's a fundamental right." He raised his glass higher. "To Lauren and David, may your marriage be built on the foundation of true recognition, of seeing and being seen, of hearing and being heard, and may you always have the courage to speak your truths to each other, even when it's difficult." "To Lauren and David," the guests echoed, raising their glasses. As the evening progressed into night, I found myself standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching my family interact with friends and colleagues in ways I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. Mom deep in conversation with my tech friends, genuinely interested in their work. Tyler exchanging parenting tips with David's sister. Melissa introducing Pete to everyone with quiet pride, no hint of her former need to be the center of attention. David appeared at my side, slipping an arm around my waist. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Chen." The new name, reflecting our decision to take David's surname, still felt novel on my ears. "Just taking it all in," I replied. "All these worlds colliding. Family, friends, colleagues, past and present." "And future," he added, nodding toward Madison, who was earnestly showing my boss something on her phone, likely the coding project I'd helped her with. "Your niece has been picking his brain about internship opportunities for when she's in high school. She's quite determined to follow in her aunt's footsteps." The thought warmed me. Not just Madison's interest in my field, but the ease with which she pursued it, so different from my own hesitant journey, constantly doubting my place and value. "The CTO announcement goes public next week," David murmured, referencing my recent promotion. "Your mom's going to burst with pride when she can finally tell everyone." I laughed softly. She's been remarkably good at keeping the secret. Old Patricia would have told the entire neighborhood by now. "People can change when properly motivated," he observed. "Your family is proof of that." As the evening wound down, guests gradually departed, leaving just immediate family and the closest friends. We gathered around a fire pit, sharing stories and dreams for the future. When Mom mentioned her plans to visit us in the fall, after her volunteer program at the local literacy center ended, no one expressed surprise. Her growing independence and interests outside family obligations had become the new normal. "I'm thinking of writing a memoir," she announced unexpectedly, "about family patterns, healing generational wounds. Dr. Levinson thinks it might be therapeutic." "That's a wonderful idea, Mom," Melissa said, and I nodded in agreement. "I'd like to interview each of you," Mom continued, "to include different perspectives on our journey, if you're willing." "Count me in," I said without hesitation. A year ago, the thought of my mother analyzing our relationship in writing would have terrified me. Now it felt right, part of our ongoing commitment to honesty and growth. As the fire burned lower and the night grew later, David and I finally said our goodbyes. We'd decided against an immediate honeymoon, preferring to save our vacation time for a longer trip later in the year. Instead, we'd be spending a quiet week at a coastal cottage nearby. Mom hugged me tightly as we prepared to leave. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, words that once would have seemed impossible from her, lips to my ears. "Not just for today, but for everything you are." "Thanks, Mom," I replied, my throat tight with emotion. "For everything." Dad embraced me next. "Remember what I said about courage," he murmured. "It's your greatest gift." "I got it from you," I told him, and his eyes crinkled with pleasure. Melissa was last, her hug lingering. "This is just the beginning," she said cryptically. "Of what?" she smiled. "Of us being real sisters. Of building something new." In the car, as David drove us toward the coast and our first night as a married couple, I watched the lights of the vineyard recede in the side mirror. My family remained gathered around the fire pit, their figures growing smaller but not disappearing, much like my past itself. No longer looming large and defining, but not erased either, just placed in proper perspective. "Happy?" David asked, glancing over at me. "Beyond words," I replied honestly. 6 months after the wedding, on a crisp fall evening, David and I hosted a dinner party in our condo. The occasion was ostensibly to celebrate my first 6 months as CTO, but it doubled as a reunion for my family, all of whom had flown in for the weekend. As we gathered around our dining table, Mom and Dad, Melissa and Pete, Tyler and Amber, Madison and Mason, I marveled at how comfortable it felt. No walking on eggshells, no carefully avoiding certain topics, no jockeying for attention or recognition. Just family, imperfect but healing, connected by both blood and choice. "Before we eat," Mom said, raising her glass, "I'd like to make a toast to Lauren and David for bringing us together in their beautiful home, and to family. Not as it should be in some idealized version, but as it is, with all its flaws and growth and love." "To family," everyone echoed. As conversation flowed around the table, I caught David's eye across the candlelight. His smile reflected my own contentment, my own quiet amazement at the journey we'd traveled. From a birthday dinner where I'd been told to stay quiet, to this gathering where every voice was valued. From feeling invisible to being truly seen. The locket from my great-grandmother rested against my collarbone, a reminder of where I'd come from and the legacy I carried forward. The pearled hairpin from Melissa adorned my hair, a symbol of our evolving sisterhood. And my wedding ring gleamed on my finger, a daily reminder of the love that had given me courage when I needed it most. Family healing isn't a destination, but a journey, one that continues long after the initial confrontation, through holidays and celebrations, conflicts and reconciliations. It unfolds in small moments. A thoughtful text from Mom asking about a work challenge, Melissa calling for advice rather than validation, Dad speaking up when old patterns threaten to resurface. It happens in private conversations and public acknowledgments, in boundaries respected and bridges rebuilt. Most importantly, it happens when each person commits to seeing others and allowing themselves to be seen, fully, flaws and all. As I looked around our table that night, I realized that the invisible middle child was gone forever. In her place sat a woman who knew her worth, who spoke her truth, who had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to stay quiet. The painful dinner that had started it all now seemed like a gift, the spark that had ignited necessary change. My mother's words, "Stay quiet," had accidentally launched a revolution, not just in my place within the family, but in how each of us related to one another. Sometimes a single moment of courage changes everything. Sometimes speaking up when you're expected to stay silent rewrites the entire story. And sometimes, the family you fight for becomes exactly the family you need. Lauren? Mom's voice brought me back to the present. You look miles away. Everything. Okay? I smiled, fully present, fully seen. Everything is perfect. I was just thinking about how far we've come. And how far we'll go, she added, understanding in her eyes. Together, I thought. One honest conversation at a time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.